Yes. Okay. Thank you. Do you hear me? Yes. So yeah, I'm Florian Witzel. I'm a 3D lead and technical director at PsyOp in New York City. And today I came with Gene Lee, who's going to show us some of our flame work we did for Absolute and some other spots we're going to show throughout the project. So the first spot I'm going to talk about is Milk Set Princess. And I'll first show the spot and then I'm going to talk about like how we did it.
Once a month, Sensitivity visits the unfortunate princess's castle. Without solace, she cried, hour after hour, day after day. Brave princes came to try and control the sea of suffering, but only one could calm the tempest. The calcium in milk helps reduce premenstrual symptoms. Drink milk.
All right. So this is how most of our projects start at PsyOp. We start with a style frame. This one in particular was done by Golden Balto. And basically the client needs to sign off of a frame and then production can start ideally. This is for us the fastest way of getting things done, and also for 3D we can estimate the efforts which has to go into production. And for us in this particular frame meant we have a whole spot, pretty much full frame and close-up water and effects, water and ocean effects in there. So everybody probably can imagine that the whole 3D department got very nervous about this, especially we had only 4 to 5 weeks to do the whole production with the water effects. But nevertheless, like before we start any anything in 3D, we also look at a lot of reference and watch them for as long as we can. And this is also like a big fun part of figuring out how things work in real nature, and we try to inspire and analyze the problem which needs to be solved. And here we only had like 4 weeks to solve the whole ocean thing, and it really needed to be solved very fast. So this was the rig then we came up with. We had to develop 2 types of waves. One was the linear walking wave and the other one was a circular expanding wave. On the top left you see a couple of controls. We have like a twist and a couple of fall-offs. Then some ripple settings, the size, the amplitude, height, choppiness and speed. Then we have the viewport resolution, the render resolution and the general wave size. I also built in a couple of controls where you can have not only the main wave, but you have a wave advancing the wave and a couple of waves following that wave, because the wave never comes in one thing. It's like it's advanced by something and followed by a couple of waves. So in the lower left you have kind of pseudo flow fields and a profile of the waves, how it looks in the render. And on the right, of course, the real-time version of what you're gonna get. And here are some render resolution views from a different camera than we saw in the spot, how it is then applied. And this is then the final comp rendered and lit. And this is then the circular expanding waves. And I don't really necessarily want to connect this to ice, but the question came up several times before. And if I would do this whole thing again, I would probably do it in ice, but we had to solve it so fast that we had only a couple of days. So everything you see here is multiple lattice deformations and expressions. And the ripples from the surface come from the Tessendorf ocean approach which Andreas Gebhardt brought into XSI. So these 2 things together make then the waves. And you know, problem solving is a slow little animal. To do it in ice would have, of course, worked as well, but for us at the time it was the most economic way to do it. And you know, a lattice you can artistically twist and shape as you want, and ice makes mathematically perfect things. And it might have been like academic or intellectual approach, but we just tried to choose the right aspects within time and resources. So again, if I would do this again, I would definitely use ice for it and really concentrate on it, but it worked out on this case. And you can see it also works from different camera angles, so it's always cool for 3D to see if something not only works in a camera, but also from all kinds of angles. So you can use it totally different in production. Then, of course, we had to render and light these waves. So here again, the render resolution of the wave, then a different perspective of the whole scene. Here's a beauty comp, then we have a foam, reflection passes, incidents, a couple of mats. This is a fume effects pass. We brought then the whole wave, we point off and everything over to 3D Max and rendered out these fume effects passes. Then matte paintings projected on 3D geometry. Here's then again the beauty comp. Then a different scene, now also from a different camera perspective. And here we see the view-dependent level of detail, the viewpoint resolution, the render resolution, and then a foam pass, reflection pass, oily specular pass, which is very useful, incidents, a volumetric underground pass, ambient occlusion, shadow pass, a motion vector pass, translucency, depth, and a matte for the wave, a height pass, and then again we brought everything into fume effects. And this is then the final comp, everything color graded and put on top of each other. Then the hand in the background, a couple of live action footages, particles mist put on top, the clouds pre-comped in the background, and this was then the final shot. So the same thing with this shot. Here again from a different camera view to see that it actually really worked. A few passes for the castle and the same set of passes again applied on this wave. And here we also added a couple of mist and particle effects from ice on it, some live action footage, P-Rapper particles in the background from the castle. Everything come together. And yeah, that was the work we did on Milk and especially the water and ocean effects.
Awful lot of effort to get some milk.
Yes. All right, the next project I'm going to talk about is Absolute Dissection. It's also running in the Computer Animation Festival, and tomorrow we're going to show that presentation again, and actually the CG supervisor of Absolute Dissection is going to also talk about it and maybe a little bit more detailed. Right, so again, this project started with reference pages and style frames, and these were also some of the first render tests we did. And here already we can foresee some problems which we're going to face in 3D. So we have many pieces of glass and water drops. We have a high, clean, reflective look with like graphic lines and dots and geometric high density structures and shapes. So this was then one of the render tests we did, like how the just basic shading could look, how the glass could break apart. Then we already see some chromatic aberrations in there, which we then also need to put in. Then also a big problem which we tried to solve was the depth of field, because we really didn't want to render depth of field. We wanted to apply it later, then in Flame. So this is something I'm gonna also talk about in a second. Another frame, how the glass could break at the section where the label is. Another little style frame. And this was then a more advanced style frame from Artis Steinforth, and it is still very graphic. At that point, we didn't want to have the liquid as real liquid. We want to make it really graphic. But that later then changed, and I think the client didn't want it. They want to see the real liquor, so everything was then live action. In the meantime, also 3D had to work on R&D, and we had to find different ways how to fracture the bottle. And here is something Andreas Gebhardt worked on. It's this is based on the brightness of the image and just breaks it up higher and higher depending on the brightness of the image. And we were also looking in different techniques like potentially processing, or how to break the glass, or like automatic maze generators. And because we actually wanted to have the glass as a real puzzle, so it should really fit together. This was one of the creative decisions, that they don't want to have random pieces. They actually want to have the glass really, all the pieces really fit together. This was then also just a fracture approach. And then also the shoot. Just want to let this run for a little bit, because I think the images which came out from the shoot are aesthetically very nice, and we were also talking about it, that you can pretty much make our own commercial only about the footage from the shoot, pretty much unprocessed. So this also then we served as a reference for 3D department, because we had to match this look in 3D. So our shaders had to mimic this style, and our geometry had to approximate also those shapes we're gonna see here. And okay, then we internally started to do a 3D test. This was not shot specific. We did this internally just to see how we can do the water. It's basically just a meta grid and a couple of particles, and then some live action particles and mist on top of it. And we, after that, we were convinced that we also can do a close-up water, and it would blend in with the water we shot pretty well. Then this is shot 11, and just a very, very rough breakdown of one of the very early passes we did for shading this shot. Unfortunately, in the final spot, we can't really see it. It's so many pieces of glass got put on top of the renders, and so much live action footage that the final shots looked very. The 3D just got very much in the background. This is shot 17, and here also again from a different camera perspective, we really wanted to place the scene and the camera somewhere on the bottle in that space. Some particles, and this is the Tessendorf deformer from which Andreas Gebhardt imported into Softimage XSI, and it gives you incredible results. Also, if you overcrank these values, you get kind of interesting things, which looks like in a washing machine or something like that. And here we have now the surface with the Tessendorf waves deformer, and underneath this deformer we just model out whatever we want from the geometry and let the deformer and the shader then do the rest. This is then a motion vector, some depth passes, and a matte for the particles, some reflection things, and then we put it together. I think as this was a pre-comp, we did some live action footage on top of it. And this was then how the final shot looked like. The bottle passes were also a little bit tricky. This was probably the most intense in terms of rendering. Flame and the compositors got really very specific about how they want to have the bottle, and also the client wanted, of course, to have the bottle in a certain way. And these renders took quite a while to render. So now we're gonna jump to Flame and talk a little. Oh no, sorry. One thing before that. This is also one of the shots. And oh yeah, here I wanted to just very briefly talk about the glass shader, which was mainly the work of Dave Barrison, and we tried to find a way to automatically shade and texture these pieces of glass. And so we didn't want to go in and manually and texture the sides and make these scratchy, fractured looks. So it's based on object normals. So it generates a matte for each side, a top, a bottom, and the sides. And this might be easy for a cube, but for a bottle it's a little bit different, because it needs to be in concentric relationship around the bottle. So each individual piece needed to figure out, okay, what am I doing? Am I facing towards the center, or am I facing away? And this would tell me if I'm a back face or a front face, and if I'm a particular dot product of this, I can get the sides with it. So this way we could make a shader which applied all these scratches and the shiny surfaces automatically based on its mathematical relationship. If you would rotate these little pieces, it wouldn't work anymore. So the whole shader would basically mess up. But since everything was like concentric, moving away, it worked out very well. Then also depth of field, we solved with multi-layer rendering. So we did not render depth of field in. And we also wanted to be able to blur different layers, and as also later put in additional layers, and don't want to stuck with a certain depth of field, of course. So what some of the 3D artists, I think mainly Dave Barrison, did was of course we did like our main passes, depth, reflection, beauty, and all these mattes. And then we got a couple of groups which we manually assigned dependent on the depth of the whole shot. And the script would then replicate those passes into layers for comp, which would put them back together. So we made those partitions based on the depth. This is also a much more economic way to render. And sorry, I was jumping here. And we could always like add additional pieces then later. Okay, so then let's jump to Flame. Yep. Okay. So this was the final from, I think, shot number 5, what we see here. And then we had also one pass where we put in every channel, the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel, we put an ambient occlusion, an incidence, and one layer of reflection in there, which is this one. Exactly, so here in every channel you see different information stored into. Then this is the refraction. No, this is the bump, exactly. This is the bump map. So we also textured each side individually. And this is the matte pass I was talking about earlier, which like automatically gets generated. Then we had in the depth pass, we didn't only put in the depth, we also put in other depth informations like concentric depth towards the center, depth towards the camera in different channels. This was then how the comp looked. We added a couple of sapphire glint chromatic aberrations on top and some tinder box refractions on there. And I think there was, yeah, okay. And this was the main color theme all the compositors used. Then they put it together with this dust footage. Can we zoom in maybe a little bit on this one? So this is like, I think every flame compositor wants to have some live action footage, and here's some mist and little bits of dots in the air, which then, if you go to the final comp, actually make the whole spot work. So can you zoom out one step? Yes, so this is then the final spot with everything applied on it. Then let's go to shot number 9. Oh, shot 14, okay. So this is also a very good example how we blended together live action footage and CG footage. I think we couldn't bring the CG footage, but we brought the original footage which we shot. So here, of course, it's just the balloon in a totally different camera perspective. So we had to go in flame, match that perspective of the bottle in the final shot, put out all the little dots on the side, and make it work just like in the previous. And we also had then also, of course, some live action footage on top. And it's kind of interesting because the flame compositors then tracked some of these little dots and built up a library of just small dots, which they could then later use and populate in crowd specific shots in specific areas where they needed to have little dots. And I think this also shows how much effort went into each and individual of these shots to really be very particular about where little dots are flying. All right, next one would be Audi synchronized. I think we have a little bit more, right? Okay. So let's check out the spot. How much more time do we have? Good. Okay, we only have 4 more minutes, so I will continue this presentation tomorrow. Then once we get cut off. But on this spot, we had to solve all kinds of different questions. So many of those were like creative and technical. On the technical side, we had to figure out how we're gonna animate all these crowds. We thought about like manual ways of doing it, and we also developed some massive like crowd simulations, which we did in ice. In the end, we ended up doing everything very shot specific, but I remember it was like kind of a University of Hard Knocks who went through this. Also, in the pre-production phase, we had to figure out how these guys are choreographically going to stack on top of each other, and all these questions which had to be figured out. Then shading and different shading studies. On the left-hand side, you see was one of the first creative ideas that it's based on the angle of ray towards the camera, how the color of this material then changes. In the end, we just made printed cards. Also, tracking was a huge thing on the shot. We had probably 50 cards per shot to track, and sometimes even 200 to 300. We tried to find out ways to track it. Eventually, we did everything in Boujou and a lot of flame tracking as well. And I remember we hired a lot of people to track. So this is just a quick breakdown of one of the shots, the passes we developed for this. There were a lot of passes which went into but from 3D in Softimage we rendered everything with frame buffers, which saved us tons of render time. So I think in 3D we only had 5 passes, and it spit out all these different layers for us. This was shot 11, which we're gonna talk about later in Flame a little bit. And here again, all these 3D passes which went into, and then some of the mattes we rendered out for Flame to blend CG together with live action. Okay, we have 3 more things to show. Do you have time or?
We have about 3 minutes.
3 minutes,
so
okay. Okay.
Dive in.
If we can jump to Flame. So let's start with shot number 5. So this is the beauty of the final render of the shot, and here we have the background people, the very far away people. They were only cards, so there were no 3D geometry. These are the midground characters, which were then 3D geometry and actually rigged. All the fingers had inverse kinematics. This was the beauty pass of the beauty of the cards. Then of course we had AO passes and incidents and reflection and specular. But again, all these passes were in one shader, so for rendering it was pretty easy. This was the specular pass. A foreground shadow pass. A matte pass to match out each side. And then a very simple pass, one of the most favorite passes for all compositors is always the randomization pass to give it a random feel. Then this is shot number 8.
No, it's shot 5.
Is this shot 5?
Background matte painting.
Okay. Oh yeah, then this was the background matte painting of that shot, which came from design. So all that stuff was matte painted. Oh yeah, then we found the creators really wanted to have a stage feeling, so we found this image and just put it in the background of that, and then a little bit of a texture to give it a textural feel. It's very hard to see in the file because there are so many layers then on top. Some God rays, which were also live action footage. Then everything come together, pre-comped for Flame. And then pre-comped together with CG, and then the green screen footage, what we shot on set, in which we had to blend into and also synchronize everything with the background people. Okay, and then the dust footage, as usual, and then we have the final render. Okay, and I think I'll continue with the rest of the presentation tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. On the upside, Florian will be back tomorrow, so we're actually going to cover some more stuff. So again, big thanks to Florian for coming out and doing this.